pull me up! What are you saying?
This is turning out to be quite the year for horror movies, and there's another new release that's impressed us. Yep, we're talking about Kane Parson's debut feature, Backrooms, and for those who don't know, the concept originates from an anonymous viral creepypasta about this otherworldly dimension. You see, liminal horror is a concept that's been explored in bits and pieces in movies like The Shining and Exit 8, but Backrooms offers a fresh take on the eerie idea of getting trapped in a familiar yet foreign setting away from the reality we know. Here, the space is built like a maze with seemingly endless hallways and strange rooms with fluorescent light fixtures, and there are hidden horrors in this dimension that are best kept away from humans. All in all, Backrooms gives you the perfect psychological dread, and in this video, we're going to be breaking down the entire film while elaborating on the climax. There are major spoilers along the way, so you've been warned.
Hello?
How is the Backrooms horror introduced in the movie? The American YouTuber and filmmaker Kane Parson had previously created an adaptation of the Backrooms creepypasta in the form of a semi-anthological web series, and this movie is actually the film adaptation of the same, although there's a whole new story here. The film gets straight to the point, and you get to familiarize yourself with the Backrooms almost immediately as the scene takes you back to the 1990s. Here, a few scientists from the Async Research Institute watch recovered footage from a fellow researcher named Naren Warren. Naren was on an expedition into this large extra-dimensional space called the Backrooms, and he got separated from his group. As he searched for an exit, he was attacked and killed by a strange humanoid creature who appeared from nowhere. We then get into the main story, which revolves around Clark, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's a furniture store owner and a failed architect. One thing that this movie makes clear from the outset is that Clark is a flawed character and a failure. He deals with his failed marriage with alcohol, and his business isn't exactly booming, even though he tries a few gimmicks with silly advertising videos while dressed up in a pirate hat. In short, he's not a fan of his own life, but by this point he's learned to live with it, and he's found his coping mechanisms even though they're far from perfect solutions. He consults his therapist, Dr. Mary Klein, on a regular basis, and even though she tries to help him cope with his situation, she herself has her own struggles. She lives with the trauma of the demolition of her childhood home and her schizophrenic mother. Then, one day, Clark's life changes forever, and it starts off rather innocuously. He has some very high electricity bills that don't quite add up, and he's also bothered by the regularly flickering lights. He speaks to an electrician about this, who finds 3 colored breaker switches installed in the distribution board, and they don't connect to the store at all. Clark continues to experience these electrical irregularities, and he tries to find the root of the problem, heading for the basement. This is where things go absolutely haywire, as he finds a slit in a wall, and while investigating this strange little slit, he phases through the wall and lands in the Backrooms. His initial experience is absolutely bizarre, and he sees several rooms with strange hallways, but what really caught our attention here is the detailing on the malformed furniture. You can immediately tell that something is seriously wrong with this place, and Clark even finds the belongings of Naren, the scientist from the first scene. Suddenly, an unseen creature chases him, and he barely manages to escape and get back to the store.
What the fuck?
The vicious rabbit hole of the Backrooms takes over Clark's life. We'd say that one of the major psychological twists in the film is how the discovery of the Backrooms exposes the flaws in Clark as a person. It breaks him down to the point where he's forced to see himself for what he truly is, and honestly, we can't think of a scarier world where our biggest fears and insecurities are fed back to us. Anyways, coming back to the story, after coming back from the Backrooms, Clark confides in his therapist about his whole experience. However, unsurprisingly, she's skeptical, and her restrained reaction doesn't please Clark. He gets help from his assistant manager Kat and her boyfriend Bobby to explore the Backrooms further in order to support his claims. I mean, it really can be frustrating when your reality is questioned, and Clark acts out a bit because of his desperation. Clark, Kat, and Bobby enter the Backrooms, and they intend to record their discoveries in this strange dimension. They come across a steeply sloped corridor where Clark and Kat tie a rope to Bobby and lower him down. However, an unknown entity attacks Bobby as he struggles to climb back up. Unfortunately for Bobby, he's not so lucky as the attacker pulls on the rope and kills him, and this also ends up dragging Clark and Kat down the corridor. A panicked Clark runs through the various rooms, and he discovers several twisted and deformed humanoid entities that chase him. Finally, he's chased into a dead end when he hears Kat calling out for him. He puts down the camera and goes looking for her, and we loved this part. someone seemingly picks up the camera in the background. If you love your jump scare moments, this is one you'll really enjoy. Kat screams at Clark to look behind him, and the scene cuts away with a strange twist. A scientist from Async named Phil watches Clark through his surveillance footage, just like the scientists watched the failed Naren Warren before. After a while, Clark's therapist Mary receives an unexpected voicemail from Clark where he says he won't return. This doesn't sound right to her, and she's worried about his well-being. Mary decides to visit Clark's store to find out more, and as she explores the store, she finds the entrance to the Backrooms. She ends up in this twisted world, just like Clark did earlier, and she wanders the hallways. Eventually, she does find Clark, but this is far from the man that she used to know because he almost seems like a lunatic at this point. He chokes her to the point where she's unconscious, and back in the real world, the scientist who watched his surveillance footage earlier, Phil, recognizes Clark from one of the advertisements for his store.
Am I right?
Hello?
Is there an escape from the Backrooms? Ending explained. When Mary regains consciousness, she finds herself tied up with Clark around, and they seem to be in a space that resembles a twisted version of a dining room. Moreover, Clark has some of the still life alongside him, and the still life are basically imperfect copies of humans that the Backrooms create. Clark is almost disillusioned, and at this point, it's also revealed that Kat has been decapitated as her severed head is shown. Clark demands Mary continue their therapy sessions via roleplay, but Mary hands him the brutal truth about his failure and his tendency to blame others for his own shortcomings. She even points this out as the reason behind his wife leaving him, but Clark seems to be too far gone to be reasoned with. He wishes to stay back in the Backrooms, and Mary assures him that he's a free individual who can decide for himself. At least this gets him to untie her, but this is when we get the entry of one of the most terrifying backroom creations, a deformed and mutilated version of Clark in a pirate costume. We really like how it all ends for Clark because even though he's been an escapist all his life, he takes a stand for Mary as the pirate Clark entity arrives aggressively. He's fatally bitten by this morbid creature, but it buys Mary enough time to flee. With a sprained ankle and nowhere to run, she's cornered in a room that looks like a replica of the furniture store's showroom, and she's forced to fight Pirate Clark. In the process, she happens to trigger a gas trap, and somehow she's able to break free even though she's knocked unconscious again after she startles a group of Async scientists. They take her back to their headquarters in the real world, and while she recovers, they study the captured still life. In the final scene of the movie, you see Mary in an interrogation room as Phil explains everything about Async. The organization used to be a company that developed MRI machines, but their work changed after the discovery of the Backrooms. Their new objective was to map the entire place out, and the scientist also talks about how there have been reports of more such doors into the Backrooms in the surrounding area. We then get another glimpse into the Backrooms, where there are several rooms that are entirely based on the buildings from Mary's memories. In fact, we even spot a newly formed still life, which is basically Mary's twisted backroom avatar, and she can be seen sitting in a poorly reconstructed interrogation room. She may have left the Backrooms, but the Backrooms never really left her. Yep, you could say that this ending is somewhat open-ended, but we think it's only appropriate to leave the climax up to the interpretation of the viewer. However, we do have a theory on the fate of Mary, and it's not exactly a happy ending. The way we see it, Mary is now a threat to Async because she knows too much. Async is by no means a noble organization, and they wouldn't want their experiments and work out in the open, which can mean only one of two things. Mary is either imprisoned by them or brainwashed completely into joining them, or, more likely, she'll simply be killed to keep the whole thing under wraps. The fact that Phil tells her that he's not in charge of what happens to her once she's done answering their questions also indicates the same.
I don't understand. What is this?
What are the underlying themes of the film, and how do the Backrooms really work? I know the story is abstract in many ways, but there are some hidden themes and interpretation to the backroom drama that you see here. We've said before that Kane Parson pulls from the lore from the earlier YouTube universe, and this includes the existence of Async and the disfigured entities that you find there, known as still lifes. What we see of the Backrooms is its failed attempts to replicate people, and the only reason that Parsons introduces a new character and a story here is because he wanted to make sure that the story makes sense. In his own words, "I don't like drowning people in lore and mythology. I think it's an irresponsible creative choice." The movie is made in a way that even those not familiar with the earlier lore will understand things just fine. We think the simplest way to explain the Backrooms is a pretty common event in video games when you suddenly end up in an out-of-bounds area that's not technically a part of the game's setting. This usually happens when you clip through a wall or any structure you weren't meant to go through in the gameplay. Now, imagine this in the real world where you end up in this dimension that constantly works as an echo chamber for memories. This is why everyone in the Backrooms sees things they're familiar with, but it's only a twisted representation of their memories and their trauma. The people from the real world appear to be imperfect and deformed, and this can be explained through the version of Clark that we see in a pirate hat. Clark isn't proud of himself in the real world, where he poses as a pirate for the meaningless advertisement videos, and the Pirate Clark version of him in the Backrooms represents all of his insecurities and self-hate. Will there be a sequel? If you ask us, we've got good things to say about this film, and the early response to the film has been overwhelmingly positive. As such, there's no reason for a sequel to be called off, especially when the director apparently already has one in mind. In an interview, Parson said that he purposely left the ending ambiguous so that he could continue in future installments, calling the sequel possibility more than an option. The story can easily continue with the fate of Mary and introduce new characters in a new setting as the maze of the Backrooms spreads ever outwards. Overall, this is a solid psychological horror flick, and we'd strongly recommend that you check this one out. In a world where fresh and unique concepts are hard to come by, the Backrooms goes past the generic stuff and brings in a new wave of horror through the purest form of fear, which is the fear of the unexplained. Perhaps the best part of the narrative is that there is no obvious explanation for everything that happens, and we'd love to see this continued in a follow-up sequel. Let us know in the comments below what you think about the movie and the idea of the Backrooms as a twisted dimension apart from our reality. Also, if you liked this video and appreciate our efforts to bring you this content, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons for a lot more content like this. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and we'll see ya in the next one.